Hello, this is Learning with Mark Warren, and today I'm going to be doing a review on the Focusrite Scarlett 18i8 Generation 2. Most computers and laptops come with built-in sound cards, and they're great for listening to music on the internet or YouTube. However, when it comes to music production, you're going to need something with a little more muscle. And that's the reason for getting an external audio interface. Now these external audio interfaces, they could be in USB format, they could be Firewire, Thunderbolt. There's all kinds of different ways of connecting an external audio interface to your computer, but the most common right now is still USB. The reason why you need an external audio interface is for latency. And basically, latency is that delay of time from when you press a key or you record something into your mic to you actually hear it out of the speakers. Now your built-in sound cards, they usually have a high latency, so usually there's a high amount of delay before you actually hear the signal itself. So they're just not going to cut it for music production software. So this is the reason to get an external audio interface. Now the 18i8 has 18 inputs and 8 outputs. Now there's a little bit of clarification that needs to be made for the name. It really doesn't have that many inputs on the device by default. So let me explain. On the front of the interface, there's actually 4 XLR combination jacks. So you could either plug in XLR mics or 1/4 inch instrument or line level devices. On the back of the unit, there's 4 additional line inputs and a stereo pair input for the SPDIF. As for the outputs, on the back you have a stereo pair of monitor outputs, 1 and 2, and then you also have a stereo out for the SPDIF also as well. Going back to the front of the interface, then you have 2 stereo headphone outputs. So if we count up all the inputs and outputs, we've actually got 10 inputs that are built into the device, which are the 4 combination jacks, the 4 additional in the back, and the stereo pair for the SPDIF. For the outputs, we have the main output on the back, the 2 headphone jacks, and then a stereo pair SPDIF output. So where are the additional 8 inputs? Going back to the back of the unit, you'll see there's an optical input. And basically that allows for an ADAT optical input via an additional device that you have to purchase for the additional 8 inputs. And that can be used with the Scarlett Octo Pre or the Octo Pre Dynamic. It should really be called the 10i8 with expansion capabilities. If you plan on only using analog inputs and outputs, you can actually call it an 8i6. Focusrite did this funny naming convention with the interfaces starting at the 6i6 and above. The 2i2 and the 2i4 are exactly how they are. The 2i2 has 2 inputs and 2 outputs. The 2i4 has 2 inputs and 4 outputs. But when you get to the interfaces that offer more inputs and outputs, like the 6i6, the 18i8, the 18i20, that's where the actual interface inputs get a little tricky because they add in digital inputs also as well. So just note that before you go purchase one of these units and count how many actual analog inputs if you're only going to be using analog or if you need expansion. So on the front of the unit we have our 4 combination XLR jacks, which allow you to plug in either 4 microphones or 4 instruments or line level devices. And you can do a combination of the 4 different inputs as well. There's also phantom power. So if you have a mic that requires phantom power, on input 1 and 2, there's 1 phantom power button which will turn it on for both of those. And on input 3 and 4, there's another phantom power button that will turn it on for those 2 inputs. So you could actually have instruments with combination of phantom power mics plugged in all at the same time. There's a gain control for each one of the front panel inputs. Options to turn on pad for instruments that are too hot can be turned on in the Focusrite control software, which I'll show you in a little bit. You can also select which type of input is going into 1 and 2, whether it's an instrument or line level device in the Focusrite control software. The front panel also has a mute switch for the main output, a monitor level knob, a separate headphone level knob for each of the 2 headphone jacks. Each headphone jack is by default a stereo pair, but if you have splitter cables, you can turn that into 2 mono signals. On the back, you have the 4 additional line level inputs, the 2 main outputs, the optical input if you want to use the Scarlett Octo Pre for the additional 8 inputs. You have your port for your USB cable. There's also an input and output MIDI port for your standard 5-pin MIDI cables, as well as your SPDIF in and output. Now, this is a powered interface, meaning that you do have to have it plugged in order for it to work. It will not work off of bus power like the smaller interfaces like the 2i4 and the 2i2. And then, of course, your standard power button. Before you even think about plugging it into your computer, be sure to go to Focusrite's website, go to Downloads, select the 18i8 Gen 2, and be sure to download the proper driver for your particular system. For Windows, it's currently version 2.17 of the Focusrite control, which also includes the driver, and for Mac, it's version 2.18. I already have my driver installed, so I don't need to do this. I just need to plug in the unit, plug in all my connection cables, and be ready to go. Also, while you're on the Focusrite website, be sure to register because that comes with a whole bunch of extra bonus goodies for downloading for your device. Now, I currently have my guitar plugged in, my dynamic microphone plugged in, headphones, and the main outputs on the back of the audio interface. I also have an SPDIF cable plugged in to the output of the SPDIF, and then it routes right back into the input. And this is for hardware loopback. If you're not familiar with loopback, loopback is built in as software into many sound cards, but it doesn't happen to be built in on this one. And basically what that allows you to do is record audio from your Windows system. So say for instance you want to record the audio from YouTube back into your DAW without running a whole bunch of cables or using an external recorder. Well, basically you would click on the loopback and it would be able to record it directly into your DAW. Well, since this one doesn't have software loopback, you can do the same thing via the cable, route your main signal to the SPDIF, and then you can record that right back into your DAW and you can edit the audio as you please. Once you have your device installed, turn it on and you're ready to go. You may need to set it as the default sound source for your computer if you want to use it for Windows audio. So in Windows, you just click on the little speaker icon down in your lower right corner, and select Focusrite USB as the audio interface. Now you should be ready to go. If you want to test and make sure it's working right, just click on the little speaker volume control. And as you can see, mine is working fine. Now, with the 18i8 Gen 2, as well as the units, the 6i6 and above, they come with the Focusrite control software. The Focusrite control is basically software that allows you to set up custom routing mixes. And it's a little confusing. Now, I previously had the 6i6 Generation 1, and they used to call it the Focusrite Mix Control on that audio interface. In the Gen 2, they actually use the Focusrite control. It's still a little confusing, but once you get your head wrapped around how it works, then it's pretty easy to understand. When you first come into the software, one of the first things you want to do is set the device settings. So here you set your sampling rate, your clock source. I'm currently using 48 kHz and then an internal clock source. The inputs can be configured also here as well. So for instance, on analog input 1, I have it set for instrument versus a line level. So I'm using my guitar on this input, so I have it set to instrument. Same for the bass. You can turn on pad if your guitar signal is a little too high. This will actually drop down the decibel. I believe it's 4 dB if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that, but I'll have to check the manual. The analog inputs 3 and 4 are where my mics are plugged in, and you can turn pad on and off for those as well. Now if you want to name your channels just to make it easier for you to remember what to do, you can just click on the top little sections here to name them. Now then you have your output routing. So in the simplest terms, and I'm going to do another video on this later that goes into more detail on the Focusrite control, but basically this allows you to have different custom mixes going to various outputs. Since there are 8 outputs on this, you can have each one configured to hear different things. So on my main output, right now I have all my inputs muted, so I don't hear any monitoring from the actual inputs as they're being brought into the computer. So I have all these muted. The reason why I have it muted on my main outputs because I can choose to turn that on or off in my DAW, so I can use the DAW to actually monitor the inputs. I also have down here the software playback devices. So this is basically your main output from Windows, and then I have also a Q out, so if I want to hear DJ setup or DJ Q mix going to output 3 and 4, I have that turned on as well. So if I were to come over here and click the volume and click the little button here to get sound, the test sound, you see and hear the actual output from Windows. If I mute this, then I wouldn't hear any Windows sounds at all. Again, I'll go into more detail on this on a separate video that will explain this a little bit more, and also into more detail and some custom routing settings that you can do for your setups. Now I'm going to show you how to quickly set up your audio interface in your DAW. So I'm actually using Propellerhead Reason and Ableton Live. So I'll show you Reason first. It's really simple. So I'm going to come into Edit, Preferences, go to the Audio tab, make sure I have ASIO, Focusrite, USB ASIO selected. Now there's other things that you could select, but be sure to select the ASIO. And this is so you can have the lowest latency settings possible. My sampling rate was already set in the actual device Focusrite control software, so I don't need to change that here. But if I wanted to change it here, I could do it and it'll change it for the entire device as well. I also have my buffer size set to 128 samples. Now the lower you get your buffer size, the less latency you will have, the lower the latency that you will have on your system. 128 works fine for me. I have a 7 millisecond latency, so I really don't hear that myself. That works for me. I could go lower if I want, but this works fine for me. The lower you have that setting, then the more stress you'll also put on your system as well. So if you don't have a beefy computer that can handle it, then it may be hard for you to actually get the lowest possible setting, which I believe is 64. So I'm going to bump that back up to 128 for me. Now, you can come and select your input channels that you want to actually have turned on. Since I'm only using inputs 1, 2, 3, and 4, these are the only ones that I have turned on. I don't use the other inputs for a reason, so there's no point in turning them on at the moment. The output channels, again, you can select which output channels you want to use. I mainly use the main output, and sometimes I'll use 3, 4 when I want to send stuff to those outputs as well. As for the rest of them, I leave them off. You can click on and bring up the control panel and change the sample rate and buffer size in Reason, which does the exact same thing as what you see up here. I am going to leave automatic monitoring on, so that'll automatically turn on my monitoring source on and off whenever I record. Recording audio in Reason is pretty simple. I'm first going to right click, create an audio track, and then I'm going to click a drop down and select the Focusrite input 4 as my input source. So right now it's already record enabled, and I've enabled monitoring for the track, so that way I hear what's coming out of the speakers as I'm actually talking. So I've got my dynamic mic here. I'm going to turn it on just to test to make sure it's working right. All right, there we go, and you can hear me through the speakers while I'm actually talking. So you can set your gain control by turning this up and down. Right now it's a little too low, so I almost have to go all the way to get this dynamic mic working, but I'm just going to back it off just a little bit there. And I'm just going to record a quick test track. This is a test 1 2 1 2. This is a test 1 2 1 2. And if we play that back, this is a test 1 2 1 2. This is a test 1 2 1 2. There we go. Now, if your gain gets too hot, then you'll actually see this turn red. If you do have that gain cranked up too much, there are light indicators letting you know that there's too much signal coming in. So I am going to back that back down. Now, setting up the audio interface in Ableton Live is very similar to Reason. It's pretty simple. You're going to come into Options, Preferences, go to the Audio tab and select ASIO. And then you're going to select Focusrite USB ASIO, ASIO, however you want to say it. Now, in Ableton Live 10, I'm actually using the beta right now. It actually offers some pretty neat things that you can do that you couldn't do in the previous version 9. So in the input config, you can actually turn on mono or stereo inputs, or both if you want them. And the other cool thing that you can do is you can actually name the inputs in the input configuration dialog box. So right now I have 1 as my guitar, 2 as my bass, 3 is the condenser mic, 4 is the dynamic mic, and SPDIF on 9 and 10 if I ever want to do any hardware loop back. So I'm going to click OK for that, and you can also do the same thing for your outputs. You can name your stereo outputs or mono outputs. So right now I just have mine set as main and Q. You can also set the sampling rate directly here, but if you want to change the actual buffer size, you have to click the hardware setup button, which will bring up this dialog box. Once you change it here and close out, then it'll update the latency settings there. So I'm just going to leave mine again at 128, which works fine for me. And once you're closed out there, you're ready to go. Recording an audio track in Ableton Live, and again, it's pretty simple. If you're in session view, you simply just click on the audio track that you want to record in. Right now, by default, is set for the track 1, which is my guitar. I can come down and change it. Because you've named these in the input configuration box, it's easy to remember what you have assigned to where, especially if you have a large interface with a lot of inputs. It's nice having these named so you know exactly what to go to. So I'm going to just change this to number 4 for my dynamic, turn monitoring to auto, grab my microphone, and we'll record something real quick here just to test it. So I'm going to arm the track, turn on the mic. This is a test 1 2. As you can see, I'm doing the monitoring all directly here in the DAW, and we'll click our session button to record. This is a test 1 2 1 2. This is a test 1 2 1 2. And now I'm going to play that back. This is a test 1 2 1 2. This is a test 1 2 1 2. And there you have it. It's pretty simple how to set up and record audio within Ableton Live. There are some other neat little configuration things you can do, like for instance on Q out, instead of having the Q go out of the main outputs, I can have it go out of output 3 and 4, and therefore I can now monitor it on my headphones, which are set up for outputs 3 and 4, while the main outputs hear something differently. So that's a pretty neat little thing you can do to set up in Ableton Live pretty easily. I'll be going over some more things that you can do with these multi-input audio interfaces in a future video, and also further explain that Focusrite control software. All in all, this is a pretty good audio interface. I really like it a lot. I don't have any problems with it. I will say when I previously had my 6i6, there was a little issue with it with the actual guitar input. Whenever I had my guitar plugged in, I would get a high-pitched whine or squealing sound anytime I recorded a guitar on the inputs. And I later found out that it was due to the USB cable. If the sides of the cable casing or the actual metal part of the cable actually touch the case of the actual interface, then it would cause like this feedback loop kind of thing, and it actually caused noise in the recordings. So I had to position it just right so I didn't get that high-pitched squealing noise in the background of all my guitar recordings. So I have not had that issue on this particular interface. So it looks like Focusrite fixed the problem on the Generation 2 interfaces, because I actually had several 6i6s that I was trying to get to resolve that problem, and all of them did the same thing. I've not had that issue on this one at all. I use this interface mainly as my stationary interface, and when I travel I use the 2i4 on my portable computer. So this is the one that stays on my desk all the time. I pretty much use it all the time. It's almost on all the time, and it's never failed me. So it's a great interface, especially if you're looking into having a home studio and want some expansion capabilities. I mean, right now I can have all my devices plugged in at once, like my guitar, the microphone, the bass, my condenser mic, all plugged in, and even recording all at the same time without having to plug in cables. And that was one of the things that drew me to this interface to purchase it. Was I got tired of moving my portable interface from the office back to the laptop and so on, and then having to reconnect everything each time I came into the studio. Now I don't have that issue. I've got plenty of inputs, plenty of outputs to work with, and if there's ever the chance sometime in the future that I need more inputs and need to expand this, I do have the 8 options as well. I hope you've enjoyed this review, and if you have any questions about anything, then feel free to drop them down into the comments below. And also, if you like these reviews and this type of content, be sure to subscribe to my channel to get notifications of when I post my latest videos. This is Learning with Mark Warren, and we'll catch you on the next one.